This is unbelievable, actually. We've got a crisis at the border. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that crisis, but let me tell you what Vice President Harris says now the reason is.
The root causes. And I'm thinking of corruption, violence, and poverty, the lack of economic opportunity, the lack of climate adaptation and climate resilience, the lack of good governance.
Putting the smugglers aside, the human traffickers aside, the people that are trying to get here, even if it's through illegal means, that are trying to flee their countries because of corruption, violence and poverty, lack of economic opportunity, that makes sense. Harry Hutchinson's our director of policy. Do you think they're on their mind is the lack of climate adaptation and climate resilience?
So that means that the climate changed without warning on January the 20th, 2021. We all know this is nonsense. The crisis at the border is purely a function of erratic misbehavior by the Biden administration, which reversed policies, border policies that were actually working.
Part of the left's modus operandi here is that they attach climate change to virtually every issue, because when they do that, it gives them permission to address every issue from their perspective, which includes, raising taxes, spending money the United States doesn't have, affecting military policy, on and on and on. If they label it climate change, they have a blank check to do whatever they want to do in their mind.
Only in Washington, D.C. does this go over. Everybody else on the outside of Washington, D.C. says, what are you talking about? This is just the reality of what happens in Washington, Jay. You know this. You get there, you listen to your neighbor, you listen to the newsrooms, press people feed off each other. It's a real problem.
I talk about the ministry of presence. Sometimes you just got to be there to know what's going on. They refuse to show up. Now, Colonel Smith, you were a military officer. You had to go to the field of battle to assess what was going on. How do you do that in this situation when they refuse to go?
When there is an issue, a crisis, a problem going on, it can be little or large, leaders show up partly because they need to assess the situation, but also it's a morale booster. It shows the people, in this case it would show the American people, that they actually care. But here's the deal. I don't think it's like Than was saying earlier, and Rick, they do not want to solve this problem, but neither do they want to correctly identify the problem or correctly identify the solutions. This is all a political calculation.
The excuses, also building their own narrative. It's a whole, the common story that we've had over and over again, which is, as some of our colleagues were saying early on, I think they're very well aware that they're painting a picture that isn't accurate. They're painting a picture that goes with their story and kind of smirking and laughing along the way.
The whole thing's a humanitarian crisis. But the fact is, there are kids, thousands of them, being brought to the United States for sex trafficking. We know this.
They're unwilling to look at the facts. They want the propagandists' media to cover it up for them. But there is no question that this porous border in the United States affects every single state. This is just the entry point for these child traffickers. And then it fans out. That is just how they get into the United States.
Human traffickers, especially sex traffickers, like drug smugglers, they don't try to go through a border crossing anyway, and they're usually not apprehended. They go where they will not be confronted and apprehended. So when we talk about the moral blight of sex trafficking of children and teenagers, most of them are crossing without being apprehended.
6,000 unaccompanied minors. You don't know if the person bringing them in that are accompanied are their parent or whether they're a smuggler coyote. You don't know. But let's talk about the legislative fixes that could get done if Washington would concentrate.
The first legislative fix, Jay, is directly to that issue that you and Rick just talked about. I mean, it's one that ought to have automatic support from Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike. It's called the End Child Trafficking Now Act, introduced by Senator Marsha Blackburn. I mean, Jay, think about how common sense this is. If you get a minor that comes to the border and they're with an adult, you need to make sure that that adult actually is their family member, is their guardian, and
Simple
not
DNA test is all you need.
Very simple. It takes minutes. Minutes is all it takes. Jay, there is not a single Democrat that has co-sponsored that piece of legislation. It ought to pass tomorrow in the United States Senate.
We are fighting back, and that's why we're working on legislation, because climate change is not the answer to the migration border crisis on our southern border.